Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. 3 martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We're glad to have you. Grab a stool. We got a lot to talk about, and usually we like to head out into the weekend with some lighthearted fare, maybe even multiple good martinis. That certainly won't happen today. There's a lot of political insanity happening, though, so we pretty much have 3 crazy martinis. One of them is from a guy who increasingly could be the next mayor of New York City. Another guy is a very established media figure, Jake Tapper, who is still trying to spin his way out of not covering Joe Biden's decline to the extent he should have. And then, of course, there's Taylor Lorenz, who it's almost hard to define her at this point, but she keeps getting worse and worse.
Do you want to officially call it the Taylor Lorenz crazy third martini of the day? Just retire the category. It's her. We're going to retire her number.
Could definitely happen. But yeah, the spin job at CNN and beyond, and resurrecting communist ideas and acting like they're new ideas is always crazy too. But Taylor Lorenz is going to be a Hall of Famer, maybe even a first ballot Hall of Famer at some point here.
Yeah.
But and one of the things that was a controversy about her, among so many other things, was her actual age. But let's talk real about aging. Have you started noticing signs like poor sleep, low energy, stiff joints, maybe even some more serious health problems? Aging is personal, and we all feel it in different ways. But now there's C15 from Fatty 15, the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in more than 90 years. It's an incredible scientific breakthrough to support our long-term health and wellness and improve aging and longevity.
Fatty 15 co-founder Dr. Stephanie Venn Watson discovered the benefits of C15 while working with the U.S. Navy to enhance the health of aging dolphins. And I don't mean Tua. Backed by more than 100 studies, C15 now knows how to strengthen cells and slow biological aging at the cellular level. Without enough C15, cells become fragile and age faster, which accelerates your overall aging. This led to the discovery of the first new nutrient deficiency in 75 years, cellular fragility syndrome, which may affect up to 1 in 3 people worldwide.
Fatty 15 is on a mission to optimize your C15 levels to help you live healthier and longer. You can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout. That's fatty15.com/3ml, code 3ml. All right, Jim, on to crazy martini number 1. And we just talked about the New York City mayor's race the other day for a variety of reasons, mainly how both Andrew Cuomo and Zohran Mamdani are horrible choices for the Jewish population in New York City. But of course, Mamdani, on the economic side, perhaps takes the cake for being the craziest person in this race because of his very left-wing, some would say communist ideas, including government-run grocery stores, which we talked about one time. And now he's got a new ad out, acting like this has never happened before. He says he's going to freeze the rent, which really means rent controls.
I'm Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, and I'm running for mayor to freeze the rent for every rent-stabilized tenant.
Wait, you're going to freeze my rent?
Yes.
Did I hear rent freeze?
Yes! This guy's gonna freeze the rent.
No hike?
None.
This guy's gonna freeze the rent.
It's true. As your next mayor, I will freeze your rent.
Paid for by Zohran for NYC.
Yeah, freezing rent. This has been done before. De Blasio did it. It's a disaster. It means that people turn their rental units into condos and try to sell them, because it also means there's no maintenance because they can't make the money they need to with rising costs overall. Other ideas, Jim, as you have pointed out, include that he wants buses to be free. You don't have to pay to use the bus. Childcare will be nothing in New York City somehow. And shockingly, a very innovative idea. He's going to pay for all of this by raising taxes on the rich and corporations.
Yeah, haven't seen that before. This is rent control always sounds good to renters, and they never really think through the consequences if landlords cannot charge market value. Usually you can only raise the price once the person moves out. And this makes a great incentive for people to not move out, because if you move into a new place, you end up paying much higher rent. Your landlord can't wait for you to move out because he's had to charge the same level of rent, whatever it was when you moved in. This is one of the rare cases where, it's usually an obscure economic issue. For this one, I can point to one of the most popular television shows of all time, Friends. And everyone always asks, How could Monica and Rachel, one was a chef and the other one, Rachel was unemployed for huge chunks of the show. And Joey, how could they afford those? And the answer was it was Monica's grandmother's. It hadn't been raised in decades. That's how they could afford to live there in such a spacious apartment in New York City. If you do this, first of all, this incentivizes this kind of fraud, where the idea of you keep somebody's name on the apartment and it's not actually a person living there. But also you just kind of create this system where you're no longer allowing supply and demand. Why would you build more housing? And a whole bunch of cities have major housing shortages if you're not allowed to charge market value and not allowed to raise the price when the value of the apartment goes up higher. So that's really bad. Two other points I want to get on here. So New York Times had a pretty darn good article on Mamdani, pointing out that he's been in Albany for 4 years as a state legislator, it says 20 odd bills. I think they mean 20 something. I don't know if all the bills are odd. I suspect some of them are. He boasts of his signature free bus initiative, but the pilot program was not renewed. A much ballyhooed proposal to clamp down on nonprofits supporting Israeli settlements was effectively dismissed by assembly leadership in a rather public fashion, right? So that, he really hasn't done all that much in the state assembly. And he's going to make, this is going to be free, childcare is going to be free, buses, all that kind of stuff. A couple of days ago, my distinguished colleague, Dan McLaughlin, who I don't know if he still lives within the city or whether he moved out, but he's, up in the New York region, was like, well, look, Jim is completely right that Andrew Cuomo is an absolute nightmare. And, leaves a trail of slime everywhere he goes and all that stuff. But because we know whoever wins the Democratic primary is probably going to be the next mayor, there's a rational argument for a conservative to vote for Cuomo as the least damaging possibility of this. And I'm not going to argue with Dan that much because I get the logic there. I just marvel at the fact. And by the way, this was not Dan endorsing Andrew Cuomo. This was not Dan singing the praise. I don't want anybody to mischaracterize Dan's argument here. That having been said, there's a guy in the comments section who's like, didn't Cuomo murder a whole bunch of senior citizens by putting them into the senior citizen homes when COVID was spreading? And it's just kind of marveling that 5 years ago, we did so much effort to expose what the actual policies were, what the actual consequences were, and dispute all the spin that he was putting on with his brother. And now, honest to goodness, there are people on the right saying, yeah, Cuomo's the best option. And yet you look at Mamdani and you totally understand why people look at Cuomo and say, okay, this is the guy who'll do the least damage over the next 4 years. It's utterly depressing.
New Yorkers, I think it's Curtis Sliwa time. If you can't choose Curtis Sliwa over these guys, come on, your future's at stake here. I don't want to draw a complete parallel here, but think about Mamdani. Nobody really heard of him before. Suddenly shoots up in popularity. Very vague about the background. Far left ideas, but he's real slick. He's telegenic, and the media just thinks he's
skinny.
Great.
Funny name. I think I know where you're going with this, Greg.
Yes. We've seen this play before, and it doesn't go well. Barack Obama came on the scene very much the same way, and the media didn't scrutinize him much, just fawned all over him, and we know what happened over those 8 years.
The other further parallel is that this would make Andrew Cuomo the Hillary Clinton in this scenario. And Andrew Cuomo was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, wasn't he?
Yes.
So there you go. So he is as George Lucas said when he was putting together the prequels, you see, it rhymes. It kind of there's a recurring theme to history there.
Yes. Yeah. History doesn't necessarily repeat, but it does rhyme. And so, I read one story today where it said that rent controls haven't been tried since de Blasio. If de Blasio did it, the best thing you can do is not repeat that, because pretty much everything that happened in those 8 years was a complete disaster for New York City. But I don't think Mamdani cares. I think he's an absolute ideologue, and if he gets in, good luck, New Yorkers.
I find myself missing at least the facial hair of the rent is too damn high guy.
Yes.
But if nothing else, like what he really should have been saying is the housing supply is too darn low. You want to bring down prices, increase supply.
Basic economics, as Hillsdale College will teach you, but we'll talk about that in just a bit. In the meantime, while the media fawns all over Mamdani, you need to be able to kind of assess the media that's telling you the story, because a lot of them have a slant even in their news coverage, as we've pointed out many, many times. But over at Ground News, they'll not only let you know what the different sources are saying about the same story, essentially, but they'll also look at the way they've covered it, look at their key words, look at the way they phrase things, and point out, yep, this is why it's a bias from the left, from the right, or whether it's relatively down the middle. So if you want to not only know what the news is, but understand the perspective that it's coming from, go to Ground News.
With Ground News, you get details about the source of your information, including if the news outlet has a political bent, how reliable their reporting is, and who owns them. All of this empowers you to compare how different news sources from around the world cover the same story.
Visit groundnews.com/martini today to get 40% off the Ground News Vantage plan and get access to all of their news analysis features. That's groundnews.com/martini for 40% off the Ground News Vantage plan for a limited time only. Crazy Martini number 2. Let's head over to Jake Tapper. He and his co-author, Alex Thompson, they're doing the media rounds big time. I guess this was yesterday or maybe the day before with Barry Weiss and her podcast, Honestly, with Barry Weiss. And she was asking tough questions about where was the media when all of this was happening, because every one of us who just watched Joe Biden do his job or try to do his job could see that something was very, very wrong. You didn't need direct sources. You didn't need deep medical analysis. All you had to do was look at the guy. But Jake Tapper is still trying to spin this to protect himself and maybe some other people here. So listen to this extended excerpt as he tries to explain what he thinks was happening, why the media didn't cover it, and why he didn't go deeper in the story.
The Biden people were not only lying to the press, and they were not only lying to the public. They were lying to donors. They were lying to their cabinet secretaries. They were lying to Democratic members of Congress. A cover-up, and like I said, this was almost as successful, and even though we all saw him aging, we didn't know he was, he had these moments of non-functioning, suggests that there's a lot of people in on something, and whether they were doing it because they believed it or they had been told it, I'd still, at the end of the day, for all the criticism of the media that I'm not pushing back on, that I agree with, at the end of the day, the Democrats did this. At the end of the day, the Biden family and the Politburo did this. And yes, there were those of us who should have pushed back more, but if you can't get any official to tell you it's really bad behind the scenes, let me tell you how bad it is. I don't know what more we could have done. And I wish that those people had been more willing to talk to the press.
Two things that just absolutely stand out, Jim. The idea that we couldn't tell without White House sourcing that he was non-functioning. You could see it in so many different public appearances. And then also the idea that, well, we couldn't get anybody at the White House to confirm it, so I guess we can't cover it.
So probably the most delightful part of the post-Biden presidency blame game is watching the media turn on the Democrats turn on the media, and the more damage they can do to each other, the better. I wish it's always kind of fun when people say, you must really know what's going on. You have great sources. I don't have great sources, certainly not in the Biden administration, certainly not in most Democrats. Surprisingly, they're not eager to share their worst secrets and their most dirty laundry with the conservative journalists. But this is one of those circumstances in which having sources in the Biden White House made you less informed. It interfered with your understanding of what was going on, because you, me, and almost very few of our listeners had any sources in the White House. So all we had to go on was the president when we could see him, which was, let's face it, not that often, between 10 and 4. And he'd go there, and he needed to have the questions on the card ahead of him. But when he would take questions, he didn't take a lot of questions. He certainly didn't do any sit-down interviews. I think the entirety of his presidency, he didn't do a single Sunday morning interview, right? So all of this stuff. And so my sense was very, Occam's razor, very simple logic. Biden, when we see him, is going to be the best of the is. That he wasn't going to be better early in the morning or late at night, because if he was, his people would put him out there. That what we were seeing was the best Biden that was possible, and it was very unimpressive. And we weren't seeing him. Probably he was about the same, but maybe he was even worse early in the morning or late in the afternoon. Why was this impossible for Jake Tapper to comprehend? By the way, I should point out, Alex Thompson did write, by the standards of the mainstream media, he was a fairly critical or skeptical of the narrative that, oh, don't worry, Joe Biden was fine. The other question is so if you were being told, oh, don't worry, he's fine. And we have a couple public examples of this. Karine Jean-Pierre insisting he's got so much energy she can't keep up with him. Karine Jean-Pierre, you should see a doctor if that's the case. People like that saying, yes, I had a source telling me Biden was fine, and clearly he wasn't. Why are you not naming those sources? Why, if they misled you, why are you protecting sources who lie to you? So I'm glad Tapper and Thompson wrote the book. There's a lot of good stuff in it. I do think it is part of an exercise to shift blame from the media to the Biden administration. The Biden administration's effort to by the way, very unsuccessful effort to fool the country, couldn't have worked to the degree that it did if the media hadn't effectively bought it hook, line, and sinker. If they had gotten the kind of coverage that every Republican president got, this would have been over in spring 2024. People would have said, this is just clearly, the guy's senile, we don't see him. He's decrepit, he's not capable of doing the job anymore. But enough people in the media believed, well, if we report on Biden's age and how decrepit he is, well, then we're helping Trump, and we can't do that.
No, it's absolutely ridiculous. First of all, where is Corinne Jean-Pierre? She's gone into the witness relocation program. I haven't seen her interviewed on this at all. I also love how Tapper is basically saying, you know what, the people who said we didn't do enough on this, that's valid. But really, I couldn't have done anything else. So while he's saying I should have done better, he's essentially defending everything that he did.
If only he had a show on CNN where he could have, asked questions of people.
Do you remember, Jim, and I know you do, from Trump's first term, where he had given the commencement address at West Point, and then he had to walk down a ramp that apparently was a little bit damp, so he took short steps and was holding onto the railing. There were panels for days on cable news about whether this president was fit for office, or the time he was giving a speech on something and he held the glass of water with two hands and looked like he might have been shaking a little bit. Wall to wall. But Biden drifts off, trails off. Anyway, as he loses track of his tangent, can't remember the names of his cabinet figures, shuffles off mumbling. Apparently none of that was grist for, hey, what's really going on here? But no, we can't do that. And so in this same interview yesterday, Tapper's also saying, well, the media was afraid of losing access or being intimidated by the White House. Apparently that only happens with a certain party in power and not with another party in power.
Yeah, you're afraid of losing access to people who are lying to you? Like, what's the loss there? Trump is now 78, and it's fair to ask questions about presidents in their 70s. I guess he did walk a little bit gingerly down that ramp, but Trump also goes in front of cameras and talks at great length to the point where his staff is begging him to stop talking, rather than having no access to him and inability to ask him questions and things like this. It's perfectly fair to ask these sorts of questions about any elderly president, but you're right, there was a much greater scrutiny towards Trump. The reason the general public indicated, the polling of the public said that people thought Biden was too old to be president, is that most Americans knew someone who was in their 80s, or they'd known someone in their 80s. And they know that most octogenarians are starting to slow down, not as sharp as they used to be, having a little bit of a trouble time, maybe need a little more rest, not as energetic as they used to be. Yes, there are exceptions. You and I usually point to Chuck Grassley, where if you ask him about his age, he will challenge you to a push-up contest. In fact, Greg, I wasn't sure whether we should disclose this to listeners, but at one point, you and I made fun of Chuck Grassley for his age, and he beat the crap out of both of us. So he's still got that level. But those are really rare exceptions, and everything we could saw of Biden pointed in the opposite direction. And yet the insistence of the Biden family and that close inner circle, nicknamed the Politburo. By the way, don't say that we're the ones who call Democrats commies. Let's point out that Democrats are calling themselves commies. Yeah, that they believe that, no, don't worry, we'll pull this off. And they were adamant that Harris should not take over, at least the Biden inner circle was, which, by the way, is kind of unnerving. They're basically saying the vice president's not ready to do the job. But God forbid some assassin's bullet, or he has a heart attack or an aneurysm or something. You have to be ready to take over at a moment's notice. And the entire Biden team's like, oh, she can't do this. She is not ready at all. You reelect him. At that point, he's 82. We now know he's got prostate cancer. God bless him. I hope he lives to be 100. But she was going to have to take over at some point in the 4 years if he won anyway.
Most likely. But yes, you could tell by that clip that they're basically trying to pin this on the Biden family and those 4, 5, 6 people that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the Ron Klain, Steve Ricchetti, Bruce Reed, that group, Donnellan. And so then everybody else is a victim. And since the Biden family is not going to be all that relevant in politics, and most of the Biden inner circle is getting pretty long in the tooth as well, they're not really going to be a problem going forward. So we're going to absolve everyone else and then pretend like nothing's wrong going forward. All right. Well, when it comes to economics, Zohran Mamdani did not go to Hillsdale College, because if he had, he would not be pushing rent controls, government-run grocery stores, raising taxes, and free, quote unquote, free stuff. That's not how capitalism works. And capitalism is by far the most successful economic system ever devised. And now you can learn all about it in Hillsdale's recently launched new course, Understanding Capitalism.
In fact, Hillsdale College is now offering more than 40 free online courses. That's right, free. You can learn about the U.S. Constitution, the stories in the book of Genesis, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church with Hillsdale College's free online courses.
In this 7-lecture series, you will learn about the role of profit and loss, why capitalism depends on private property rights, the rule of law, and above all, freedom. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll in this course, Understanding Capitalism. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll for free. All right, Jim. Third crazy martini, and I'm not sure they come any crazier without being committed than Taylor Lorenz, formerly of the New York Times, formerly, more recently, of the Washington Post. Now that she's not with the Washington Post, we can talk about her a little bit on this podcast. And so yesterday there were tweets going around about how younger generations were very skeptical about 9/11, what really happened, and whether it was a pretense for, 20-some years of war and all that. And Taylor Lorenz, of course, can't stop herself from chiming in. Last time we heard her, she was extolling the awesomeness of Luigi Mangione for killing the guy from United Healthcare. So her tweet on 9/11 is this. Quote, "You don't have enough respect for the sanctity of 9/11, unquote. It's such a ridiculously out of touch and frankly, pardon her language, boomer take in 2025. 9/11 has been a punchline for over a decade. People are having 9/11 themed parties, and there are 9/11 parody t-shirts and memes all over." So, Jim, she is either in the weirdest internet bubble I've ever seen, or she's just trying to gaslight the rest of us, everyone who actually remembers 9/11. And I think a lot of people who are too young to remember 9/11 understand it in a very different and appropriate way.
First of all, Greg, let me begin by saying how disappointed I am that she is still raw dogging oxygen by speaking without a mask. She has, lamented all this. I also am kind of struck by the fact, look, people have wondered, why did Jim not make fun of Taylor Lorenz when she works at the Washington Post? When I started writing columns for the Washington Post, they asked us to play nice with others. And so I never make fun of anybody who's currently working for the Washington Post. Doesn't mean I don't have opinions about them, but there are a lot of conservatives who can rip into the Washington Post, and every day, if there's something objectionable about it, you're just not going to hear it from me. I think my bosses have a right to ask me not to make fun of my coworkers publicly. Emphasis on publicly, and boy, wouldn't you love to hear the off-the-record sessions between Jim and Greg. But Taylor Lorenz has sounded deeply troubled for a really long time. Really, oh, that person's crazy. No, really, the degree to which she believed that anybody who was not wearing a mask in 2023, 2024, 2025 was trying to kill her. This is a sign of someone who really has deep-rooted emotional, psychological problems and needs help. I genuinely hope she does find it. This is not someone who is doing okay. Now, she also has gone independent, and as a result of this, she needs people to pay attention to what she's doing on her independent new publication now. And I suspect that if you want people to pay attention to it, saying Mangione is a morally good man is a way to get attention. Saying 9/11 has been a joke for 10 years is a way to get attention. It's a terrible way to get attention. And everybody jumps in and says, again, revealing a little bit of our pre-show discussions, Greg pitches this idea as a topic to discuss. And I'm like, we're kind of giving her what she wants. On the other hand, some things are so terrible that you should point that out. I wrote a corner post saying, Luigi Mangione is not a morally good man. I also read, that comment she had made came in the context of a CNN documentary. Why is CNN putting her on? If you want to say, why does Luigi Mangione have a fan base? Why is she, why are there, but apparently a surprising number of young women swooning over this guy. Okay, I'm going to say, it's a little old, but that's a legitimate topic for coverage. Why are you featuring Taylor Lorenz, and are you featuring her to discuss and analyze this phenomenon, or as an example of this phenomenon? Either way, I just kind of wondered what CNN was thinking here. I think statements like this are further evidence that this is either it's a shtick in which she's trying to come up with the most shocking. There are a lot of terrible things that you can say. Adam Gase was a good coach. There are things you could say, but they're probably not going to get an enormous amount of attention. But saying 9/11 was a joke, that's the sort of thing that would make people say, hey, what the hell's wrong with you? It gets the blood pumping. And so I can't tell whether this is genuine mental illness or whether this is something where it's somebody who's acting and saying crazy things because they need the attention to keep their journalistic endeavor that pays them going. Either way, it's not great. Hey, happy Friday, everybody.
Could be both. Could be both. I was just thinking she must be a proud graduate of the Kanye West School of terrible PR stunts.
Right? Yeah. But then people are still listening to Kanye. Even when he was wearing the Cobra Commander mask. Even when poor Alex Jones had to say, now I've done the research here and Hitler was not a good guy. Do you realize how freaky it is when Alex Jones has to be the voice of reason?
Suffice it to say, some people get addicted to attention and then they don't know how to not constantly be seeking attention, and they'll do anything to get it, and this is where you end up, and it's never good.
What if you did actual journalism? Would that get you attention? How about that stuff?
I think this is easier. Jim, have a great weekend. See you Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific weekend. Join us again Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.